Hello, and welcome to Conquering Finale. My name is Jason Lafredo, and today we are going to continue corralling clefs. I'm going to show you a few ways to customize the clefs within your Finale file. So I've got a file set up here with some clefs in it to illustrate some of this. And the first thing we're going to look at is fonts. And we're going to change the fonts globally for our clefs. So we go to Document, Document Options, and we find the fonts pane. All right, now in this pane we'll be able to change any font globally within our file. And for the clefs we want to find notation and then scroll down to clefs, set font, and you'll notice that Maestro size 24 is set because that's the default set for clefs in a Finale file. And let's say we're going to change it to Jazz today. So find the Jazz font and hit apply, and you'll notice that all of the clefs globally will change to that Jazz font. All right, so that's how you would do that. For now, let's go back to our Maestro font, apply, and there we go. So that's the global change of the Clef font. The next thing we're going to look at is the Clefs pane of the document options, and I'm going to show you some of the parameters in here that you can mess around with. We have two options on the top. Display Clef only on first staff system pretty much is what you'd think it is. Check it, hit apply, and let me just zoom out to show you what it does. It'll put the clefs only on the first system of each page and not any other system. All right, that's useful for lead sheets. It's a common way to do lead sheets is to eliminate the clefs after the first system on each page. So that's how you do that. So we uncheck that and go back. Display courtesy clefs at the end of staff system. Again, that's pretty much doing what you'd think it would do. I have these courtesy clefs here at the end of these first two systems. If we uncheck that and hit apply, they go away. I wouldn't recommend using that or not using that, but it's there if you want it. Spacing. Let me just go out of here and zoom in a little again just so I can show you some spacing options. Back to our document options, clefs pane. Before clef, the spacing before clef. Now this is going to be the space between the left bar line and the left side of the clef. So if I change this to a larger number, should illustrate the point fairly well. Apply. See how that gets nice and big. So you can change that number as you want depending on whether you think that the clef is too close or too far away from that left bar line. All right. The space after the clef is going to be what it sounds like. We can change that to a large number to illustrate it. And let me just zoom out so you can kind of see. It affects the space after the clef in all situations, whether there's a key signature there or a time signature or just music. All right, that space increases. If we go back and change that back to 0, and the next two will deal with specific cases. So extra space between clef and key signature. If we do that, it'll, like it said, put extra space between the key signature and the clef, but not in other circumstances like with the time signature or with music. And of course, the other option, which is putting space between the clef and the time signature, is really a specific case to change that space between clef and time signature when the key is when there is no key signature, essentially. So, all right, so that's what those spacing options do for you. All right, let's reset that back to normal. The next part of this dialog box is the default clef change, and it's already set up with the treble clef, and of course we can change it to anything we want. I'm going to show you really quickly what that does. So with that default clef change set to treble clef, if I go to the staff tool, staff menu, and add new blank staff, it should add a staff with a treble clef. Right? Let's undo that, go back to document options, reset that default clef to alto, apply, OK, staff, new blank staff, OK, and now we've added a staff with the alto clef instead of the treble clef. All right, so that's how you would do that. It is a very specific case because this will only apply to staffs that are created with the staff tool in that manner. If you add an instrument in the score manager, Finale will add the instrument with the appropriate clef that it's supposed to have, so it won't be affected by this default clef change. It will only apply to staffs created in the staff tool in that manner. Okay, so that's what that does. Reduction, we have it set at 75%, and that's pretty normal. that is the relative size of this mid-system clef compared to the clef at the beginning of the system. You can see how this treble clef is a little bit smaller, and we can highlight that a little bit further if we make that a smaller number. See how small it is. So if you don't think 75% looks good to you, you can tweak that a little bit, make it 85%, and you know that mid-system clef will be a little bit larger for you. All right. The offset, now this number will again relate to the mid-system clef, and that will adjust the distance between the clef and the bar line. So I've got it set to 0.02778, which is the default, and we can change that to -0.5, and you'll see that it goes way farther away from the bar line. If this was set to 0, by the way, it would be just basically right on top of the bar line. And if this number was positive, it would actually go the other way to the right of the bar line. All right, so what we want is -0.02778. I believe that number was, yes, and that's our normal setting. So again, you can adjust that if you don't like how Finale draws that. And one thing I would point out about that is the offset. You see here I have a clef that appears after the bar line, which I showed you how to set up in the last video. If you change this number to, let's change that back to 0.5 and apply, it'll actually change, it'll send that clef to the right. So again, a negative number is sending the clef away from the bar line. Think of it that way. A positive number will send that clef the other way. So it's a little bit left-handed to think of, but that's pretty much how that offset number works. Okay. So we've touched on most everything in here. The next thing I'm going to show you is the Clef Designer. All right, let me just zoom in a little bit so I can illustrate a few things here. Document options, Clef Designer. Okay, now this will allow you to create some custom clefs, and you'll notice that your 18 available clefs will appear here. And one limitation of Finale is that you can't have a 19th clef. You only get 18. So if you need a custom clef, you're probably going to have to select one of the clefs that you're not using and change that clef and make it another clef that you want to use. For our purpose, I'm just going to work with a treble clef here and show you what you can do with this Clef Designer. The first thing that you can do is select a different character. Now this will be a character from the Maestro font set, so you can kind of pick any of these characters and create a weird clef if you want, an upside down fermata in this example. And we can reset it to go back. All right. Use default clef font. If we set the font here, we can change the font just for one clef. So if we select Jazz again, now we're just changing the font for the treble clef only. All the rest of the fonts will remain in the Maestro font, but we've just changed the default, the font for that specific clef. All right, and then we can check that to go back. Easy enough. Furthermore, you can create a shape to use as a clef. So if we click shape and click on select, the shape selection dialog box will appear, and this is pre-populated with elements or shapes that Finale will give you to start. And this shape selection dialog box will actually appear in other places in Finale as well. So it's useful to know. But we can select this trill, for example, and we get this trill clef. All right. Let's go back and let me show you a more useful purpose for the shape designer of clefs. Actually, one more useless purpose before we get to a useful. If we select shape, the other thing we can do is draw our own clef. So I'm in the shape selection. I'm going to create my own shape, and the shape designer box comes up. And again, this is something that will come up in other tools in other places. So this is something that you can become familiar with at some point. But anyway, in the shape designer, you'll get these kind of drawing tools, and you can kind of, draw any kind of shape that you want and combine shapes and everything and get some funky little things going on. So that's the clef that I want. It's a silly little thing, but that's what it is. Click OK, select, and now my treble clef has become a monstrosity, and it appears in my score. All right. And of course, we can go back and reset that. Now I'm going to show you one useful purpose for this, and I have this file set up on purpose with the tenor voice. And you'll notice that I have the octave displacing treble clef. Now there is a historic clef that uses two treble clefs right next to each other to indicate the octave transposing treble clef. It's an old way of doing this this treble clef with the 8 under it. And I'm going to show you how to do that with that shape designer, with a Clef Designer. So you'll notice that in these 18 clefs, you don't have that option ever, right? But if that's the clef that you want, we can customize it. So let's customize this tenor clef, this octave displacing treble clef. Right? We're going to choose shape again, select, and we're going to create a new clef. And the shape designer box comes up. Now, one of the options we have is to enter text here. So we can click the A for the text tool. In our shape designer menu, make sure that we have the font selected. Go to select font. Make sure that we have Maestro 24 selected, because that's the font and the size of our normal clefs. And we'll click on somewhere in the staff here. And I happen to know that the ampersand is the type that the thing that you type in to get the treble clef. So 2 ampersands and you get 2 treble clefs in a row. And there you go. And then just you want to choose a selection tool, and you can drag it around a little bit and make sure that it's on the right space. And that little circle right there will help you line it up with the left. You want that to be the left side of the clef. All right. And so I'm going to put it right about there. I think that should be good. Click OK. Select. And now we've got that historic octave treble clef there that we will use, and click OK, and you notice that it exists here now. All right, little handy use of the Clef Designer. And a couple more things I'm going to show you in there before we end. If you are creating some custom clefs, maybe with some funky shapes that you've designed, or if you found a clef in another font, some type of historical clef or something, you're going to want to be able to define the notes for that clef, right? So the way that Finale deals with this is it gives you the middle C position from top of staff line, and it'll give you a value here. Now in the case of the treble clef, the middle C position from the top staff line is going to be -10 steps. So if we're looking at our treble clef, you know, the F is the top. So E, D, C, B, A, G, F, E, D, C is 10 steps. That's why it's -10 steps down, right? For the bass clef, the middle C position is going to be 2 steps above, right? The top staff. And the clef position from top staff line, that's just, there is a center point for each clef. The treble clef happens to be circled around the G. I guess that's why they call it the G clef. So again, that position from the top staff line would be -6, okay? And you'll notice in the other treble clef staff over here, which is that the soprano clef, I believe that's called? In the soprano clef, you'll notice that clef position is -8 versus -6 in the treble clef. All right, so that's what those two fields will do for you. Now, the musical baseline offset, for the life of me, I can't figure out what this does. I've been playing around with this Clef Designer for a while now and have looked at some of the documentation on it, and I just can't figure out what it does. I've put random numbers in there, and it doesn't seem to do anything. I'm sure there is a use for that, and I'm sure some Finale whiz that's super familiar with the Clef Designer will tell me what exactly that musical baseline offset is for. But for now, it doesn't appear to have any important function, so I'm just going to leave it alone. All right, so that is Clefs. I've shown you Clef Designer. I've shown you all your options for spacing and everything, and showed you how to change fonts. And that covers Clefs in Finale. There's not much more to talk about, and I feel like you probably have a pretty good grasp of Clefs by this point. So thanks for joining me, and I'll look for you on the next video.